who's back to talk about CalPERS.
Nate, thank you very much for coming back. I was concerned. I said, he's got the baptism of fire twice, and he's coming back for more. But I really thank you for allowing our public, whatever small it is, to listen to actually what's happening in the world. Because people, if you've never been anywhere, if you've never done anything, you've never been successful, it's all Greek to you. And why, if you could just explain in a short sentence or two why it was smart to pay CalPERS in one fell swoop versus staggering it out. And what we saved is it is a loan classified, but we do the same thing in business. You get 2% discount if you pay in net 30. Okay, that's the same thing.
Yeah, 210 net 30. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Andy, and good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to once again address your audience. So you asked me a question in a word or in a sentence. What's the benefit of the early remittance of the payment for the unfunded pension liability to CalPERS? And I would say that it's just an idea of short-term taking some pain for a major long-term benefit. And that's exactly what we need to be, I think, doing, is we need to be willing to take some pain today in order to have a better situation for our children.
Kicking the can down the road any longer is not an option, is it?
That's right.
And it's going to hurt.
And pretty soon, if that continues, there won't be options. There will be one option, and it won't be a quality option.
Right. We're solution-orientated in Yuba County, and we hope that with some of the help, and we're looking to you for a little guidance. We're dancing with the clock here, and hey, don't worry about it. We'll take over the show here, and I really need to have Nate start on what he's doing. Okay. All right.
It's fast.
Well,
Okay.
What I was going to talk to your audience about this morning was a little bit about the role of accounting, and specifically the role of accounting in government. But obviously, I'm going to tie this into pension and the reason I was motivated to speak to this morning is I want to establish, if possible, credibility. I want to establish credibility that I myself, as well as other auditor-controllers such as Rich Uberly in Yuba County, that we can speak to this issue because this is part of our expertise. This is really exactly why we're here. So it wasn't until GASB 68, which became effective. GASB is Governmental Accounting Standards Board. It's our national standard-setting body for governmental accountants. And what GASB 68 did is, as of June 30, 2015, it required that we now report the unfunded pension liability on our balance sheet, or what's also called statement of net position. So I wanted to describe that, one, this came from accountants. This came from the National Body of Accountants, 7 directors on the GASB board. And it's through their wisdom that we require now to record the unfunded pension liabilities I just stated on our balance sheet. What that does is it puts it up in front of the decision makers and says, look, you can no longer ignore this. It's right here. And so I wanted to describe the severity that in 1 year, the change to our balance sheet. And you don't have to be an expert accountant, I think, to grasp what this did. So overnight, and I mean over the period of 1 year, from June 30, 14 to June 30, 15, because government is on a June 30 fiscal year, that is local government, we went from 150 million of net assets so that's called our net position, 150 million of assets like cash, things along those lines, exceeding our debts, liabilities. So 150 million net position. Then as of 6/30/15, because of the mandatory requirement now to record pension debt, we dropped about $100 million to a net position of $49,654,615. So overnight, or over the course of 1 year, $100 million drop in our net position. Now, in reality, it wasn't that we didn't have that drop. The reality is the debt was there as of June 30, 14. We just didn't record it. So this is where accountants, CPAs, what have you, played a huge role, massive, in bringing the conversation about pension debt to the forefront. Because, again, when it's not recorded in the financial statements, it is so hard to have a conversation about it. Then the next thing on the horizon, which is now going to be recorded in our books, in our balance sheet forevermore, is our OPEB liability. And that is with GASB statement number 75. So now transitioning to retiree medical, retiree medical. So if the county, for example, it pays for a portion of a retiree's medical until they reach the age 65 and take on Medicare at that point, that is the liability I'm talking about. So the employee retires. They now have, say, for the next 10 years from age 55 to 65, a portion of their medical premiums paid for by the county. So that OPEB liability, other post-employment benefits, is going to be required to be recorded on our balance sheet forevermore as of the fiscal year that just ended, June 30, 17. So again, accountants in the form of GASB have brought some clarity to this really big financial debt, OPEB, and have shined the spotlight on it, so we can now address it. Now, in local government, we have in 47 of the 58 counties in the state of California, you have elected auditor-controllers. 11 of the auditor-controllers are not elected. Again, the other 47 are. And I don't think we'll have much time to speak to why they're elected versus appointed, but I bring that up to say that auditor-controllers are your fiscal and financial representatives. They're your eyes and ears in government, in local government, and we take that role very seriously. So if you haven't ever had a conversation about the financials of your local government or the fiscal status of your local government, seek your auditor-controller. We've got a lot of information to share, and we're going to continue to work on ways to promulgate and push out that financial information to the citizenry.
Thank you very much, Nate. I have in my hands the 2017-18 budget. Where would I look to find that particular entry for our unfunded mandate?
Well, it's probably not going to be anywhere contained in that budget document. It's going to be in your audit report, or what's called your CAFR, your Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. And I'm not certain if Yuba County is on a CAFR or an audit report, but that's where we're going to find the balance sheet, and the balance sheet is where you're going to find the pension debt.
Okay.
I have a question. I want to know who was behind this movement to expose these liabilities. So was it people in your position, other accountants, that were behind, let's put it on the books, let's stop ignoring it, let's put it on the books? Or was it someone else who was behind that movement?
Well, that's a great question, Matt, and I couldn't tell you with certainty what drove this, other than I can read what GASB described as their motivation, and that was stated as follows: that with the housing market decline in 2008, it created a real difficulty for local governments to continue financing themselves as property values decrease. Local governments in California are most primarily financed by property taxes. So that in and of itself caused great hardship for, as Andy was just showing us, the budget aspect of how do we fund next year. So I think with that, and with just the other pressures related to unfunded pension liabilities, it became all too great to ignore the lack of recordation, and that and OPEB are these two huge financial liabilities that are not on our books, and that is something that accountants, we don't sleep well at night with that. We need it to be on the paper.
Okay. But the real estate market has rebounded approximately 65, 70% from the drop that it took in 2008. Now, why would that not be sufficient to offset some of these problems? That you have CalPERS coming saying, well, we made X number of percent gain in that particular year, but what is the overall average for 10 years? Because you can't take a look at, and that's where the problem was, is they were in the .com bubble, and they took those values and attached those values to future increases in retirement. What do you think the 10-year average on CalPERS actually is? Because it sounds good that you 11.2%. That's a pretty big number, but I would venture to guess I don't think anybody's getting close to that.
Well, I don't have the last 10-year history on my fingertips or off the top of my head, but I would imagine that it's a bit depressed because 10 years ago was 2007, 2008, and that was the beginning of
it started in 2005. 2005, you saw the market starting to unravel, and people say, "Well, no, that's not the case." And excuse me, I was I had my real estate license.
Right.
I was right in there, and I was concerned my check for my house that I sold was not going to clear. So,
right. Although the real estate market did start cooling in the time frame you mentioned, the major hit to CalPERS was in the 07 to 09 time frame, and we had a 30% negative investment return for CalPERS. And
but they were basing it on unrealistic figures from the .com. All you need to do is put .com after your name, and you're going to make $1 million, and that's irresponsible.
Yeah, I mean the overall or the overarching I think analysis on the yield is that historically they have been able to. So if you look at the last 30 years or the last 50 years, CalPERS and the rest, and by the rest I mean the market overall, they've been able to obtain easily the 7.5% on average. That the current discount rate is set at CalPERS, and now that's going to 7%. Excuse me. In about 3 years, it'll be at 7%. But the problem is you can't always look at past to understand what the future is going to hold. Past is one indicator of future, but it is not the end all be all. And sometimes the past almost is irrelevant. In other words, if the future holds quite a different set of circumstances in the past, it's going to be different, and the past becomes less useful to you. So why am I saying that? Well, the future for us, at least in the near term, say the next 10 years, again, we talked about ZIRP a couple of shows ago, zero interest rate policy from the feds. As long as that ZIRP, and they're no longer doing ZIRP, they've increased it 50 basis points maybe, or 25, not much. But as long as our rates at the Fed Treasury are so low, I believe the 7% discount rate that CalPERS is moving towards will still continue to be high. The investment yields are going to be low insofar as that Fed's Treasury rate continues to stay low. And they're keeping it low because they're trying to spur market gains. But it's a catch-22 because it also it has other impacts, such as putting less money in the pockets of retirees that saved.
Okay. What can we do as a county on a local level to hedge our bets, so to speak? And why are we between a rock and a hard spot? My saying is, the feds can print it, the state can steal it, but counties have to live with what they got.
Well, I think if we really shirk our old ways, and we consider that we are moving into a new time, that we have not had these kinds of financial challenges in our entire history, never. And we have to understand that and recognize that. And we can't turn away and say, oh, it'll be fine, or, oh, CalPERS will have a great investment return. So this year, CalPERS, they just announced last week or 2 weeks ago, they had an 11.2 investment return for the last fiscal year ending June 30, 2017. So, which is what you just mentioned. I think that we always need to mention when they do well. We can't just cut them and describe criticisms or concerns. So we're happy to state and to show, hey, CalPERS hit 11.2%. I will mitigate that slightly by saying the S&P 500 over the same period hit 15.5%. So they were 4% less than S&P 500, the index.
Okay, but I see that we're trying to change the end result, whereas we're not addressing the root cause of this problem. It's you can't achieve a quality of result and have freedom, and that's what most liberals try to do. They say, well, because I don't achieve this, we must do this. But the root problem started in the 60s and 70s when our values changed and we became a can't we all get along situation. And that has given us what the millennial at this early show had about a Harvard graduate who showed up late to the first day of work. And Matt's saying that was a stage thing, but
It had to be. It was
no. Yeah, there are people that stupid, but we actually have to deal with the root cause of this, not the result of this. The result is because of our actions here. What can we do? What do you think we could do? I mean, let's take it for instance. We have longevity, okay, and when we enter union discussions, it doesn't enter into it because that's a given. But in one case, we can take, and if we had the department head not eligible for longevity, we would save almost 10% of their personnel costs. Okay?
Yes.
And what it takes is people willing to make that sacrifice to bring back stability to the government. I mean, in the 70s, I knew people who worked with the DMV. The reason they worked for the DMV is they were sure they got a check. Okay? I was a commissioned salesman selling insulation. I was not sure. I was not guaranteed a check. In fact, I experienced the departure situation, which was, the sales meeting, they got you up and they said, hey, you remember yesterday? That was your last day. Here's your check. And that's the difference between government. Now, we guarantee people a retirement, but how can we change that retirement to where it actually becomes realistically sustainable?
Well, that's the $1 million question. I should say the $1 trillion question.
Yes.
So I want to state before I dive in any kind of answer there, Andy, that because we've been talking about that. This is now our third week. We've been speaking to the pension concern here in Yuba Sutter area. And I want to mention for any of the employees of either of our counties out there, or just speaking to my county, Sutter County, that the plan that is coming together, it does not impact current employees' pension. Because I've been hearing concerns about that. I've been hearing that the words that are coming out of my mouth are very much upsetting current employees, and I say, well, why? That shouldn't be the case.
It's illegal to mess with that.
Well, and I clearly stated in my plan that that at year 10 or year 11, when we go to what's called a closed plan, as I've explained, only new hires from that point forward would no longer be allowed or provided an option to join CalPERS and therefore have a pension. And so the plan would be that those individuals would be offered a 401k. But all employees that work at the county today, all employees that we hire over, say, the next 9 or 10 years, they're all unaffected. Just got to clearly state that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now back to your question. Well, again, I think this goes to we are entering a new time. There are new challenges here. We got to look at things differently. And if longevity is becoming such a financial burden that it's unsustainable, we as local elected officials, we have got to do what's right for our taxpayers. The employees are so important, but to me, they do not rise above the taxpayer's concern. The taxpayer, and really I should say the citizen, they are number one. We have got to create a situation where their tax dollars fund an appropriate level of local government service, so appropriate cost, appropriate service level. We got to keep that always in mind. Employees do not rise above the residents or citizens or taxpayers.
Yeah. Well, that's always been the feeling, is that, we're starving out there, and our government leaders are making X number of dollars. It's like the health plan. If we put McCain under the same Obamacare health plan, I would be happy, because he may not be long for this situation, but how can they ask us to endorse a health plan that they're unwilling to use themselves?
Well, if you are, I know the question is rhetorical, but any reader of history knows that is a situation of an oligarchy, or of a class where there's a special elite at the top that have different rights than the rest of the citizenry. So it's completely inappropriate for the Congress to have any kind of health plan. I think that's materially different from what everybody else has afforded or available to them. I also think that it's important that as we're talking about the federal government, that we mention GASB 68, GASB 75, so pension, recording your pension and recording your retiree medical. Mm-hmm. Both of those debts are not required to be booked on the federal balance sheet. That is, they do not apply to the Fed. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about Social Security and Medicare. And the actuaries just last week were releasing insolvency dates for Social Security and Medicare, and they're in the next 20 to 30 years. And by insolvency, I mean the money that's coming in will no longer pay for the current burden of the folks that are enjoying that benefit. This money was originally set aside in a trust fund, and our own leaders over the past 90 years have taken from those two trust funds.
That's a good point, is that this was not designed to be the gift bag that our politicians are doing today to buy votes. It needs to be, and it needs to be cut back. And unfortunately, giving somebody something, we have a bunch of children. They're going to hold their breath and jump up and down and scream because we want to take it back.
It's important to remember that Social Security and Medicare, every week or every 2 weeks when we pay the paycheck, 7.65% of your paycheck, gross pay wages, are taken from you, and they're sent to Social Security and Medicare. 6.2% Social Security, 1.45% Medicare. The employer pays the other 7.65. It's a total of 15.3% that they take and send to these trust funds. That money. So what I'm saying is this is not an entitlement. There's no entitlement here.
Right.
Social Security and Medicare were funded by those individuals that are ultimately going to benefit. But that money was supposed to not be touched.
If you were self-employed, guess what? You double that rate.
Yeah, exactly. Self-employed.
And that comes off the top.
And taxes. Yep.
But how do we don't have politicians with the guts to be able to say, hey, excuse me, I'm sorry. Because you can't get along with people, we're not going to pay you SSI. I mean, I don't know where. Check their birth certificate. I'm not on it. So how can we? Well, anyhow, we're getting off on a tangent here, but let's get back to CalPERS. Go ahead.
Well, I thought maybe it'd be good to talk a little bit about where we're going and also what we've discussed the last couple of weeks to try to bring it all together. And so working on this plan, it's a real busy time for us accountants because we're dealing with year-end close, June 30, et cetera. But nevertheless, we're also working on this CalPERS plan, and it's developed into a 20-year model. The first 10 years being asset building. We need to put away as much money as possible, and we need to prepare ourselves for what's coming from CalPERS, and that should be done no matter what happens in year 10 or 11. So in my plan or my thinking is, let's move away completely at some point in the future, in this case 10, 11 years, from CalPERS, and no longer would new employees come in and be part of that pension plan. Long problem. It took a long time to get here, so it's going to take quite a bit of time to get out of it. But let's have a solid plan that we can show the people we are respecting you, we're respecting your children and grandchildren, and we want to make this right. And we don't want to kick the can, because once again, if we don't do something now, it only gets exponentially worse. If we do something now, it becomes exponentially more tackleable. So either way, act or don't act, but it's we have a huge opportunity here to make a big dent.
But everybody says, not me. Okay, and that's the biggest problem is we have people that their main concern is, and it's normal human nature, what about me? Well, unfortunately, there's a reason you've elected stupid people in the government. And, for some strange reason, they thought there was an ATM there.
Well, my hope is the good people of Sutter County elected me about 3 years ago, and they put me in this role, and I take it very seriously. And my interest is only to do right by them every time. And I don't care if I'm reelected. It's do I want to be? Absolutely. Do I want to continue to serve? Absolutely. Right. But my goal here is to do right by the people. So I will not be the politician that goes away quietly. And in fact, I want this to work out for Sutter County so well that other counties and cities start to jump in with us and do the same sort of plan or something similar. And it doesn't have to be anywhere. It doesn't have to be the same plan or the same model, but they just merely need to address it thoughtfully.
I guarantee you there aren't 3 radio shows talking about what we're talking about right now. Because, again, it's the finger in the ear, la, 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 la. You don't want to hear about it. Well, if you don't hear about it, you're going to end up like Argentina, and they're going to run printing presses to print the money, and you're going to see a wild inflation. And for those who've never seen 21% home mortgage loans, I have.
I have 3 small children in my home with my wife, and when I look at them, I think, can we really? This is the first time in American history where we are probably going to leave our children with a worse situation than we were left with, from our folks. That is unpalatable to me. That must be fought. That must be pushed back. And we need to address this monster, this pension beast. And it is not just a local problem. California state, something like $180 billion unfunded pension liability. Mm-hmm. The feds, again, the Medicare, Social Security, something like $100 to $200 trillion, more wealth than the entire world.
I grew up in a time in the 70s where if you couldn't get a job, there was something wrong with you. I think it all started when I think Marshall changed the makeup of our representation in California, because pretty much California was a relatively stable state up until that point in time. Then people figured out they could vote themselves increases, and that's there's a statement in the Constitution about that. But go ahead.
Well, Matt mentioned earlier FDR, right? And FDR had a pretty famous quotation attributed to him from a speech where he describes the inappropriateness of public employee unions. And this is from the Democrat, Paragon president, FDR. And he explained it very simply. And again, this is in the 30s, I understand. A little bit different time, but a lot of the same circumstances are present today. The union has mandatory contributions taken from it out of their paychecks. They then, and I'm speaking at a high level here, then the union makes contributions to politicians. The politicians provide good legislation for the unions, and that cycle continues. So there is an argument from FDR that public employee unions really aren't appropriate. Unions were meant for the private sector.
Cool. They proved that in negotiations. I've listened to some of the results of the negotiation, and I asked pointed questions. Who do I fire next? And that is really a terrible question to ask a supervisor. Who do I fire? Give me a list of the people I have to fire. And their point was, we don't care. whatever you have to do to get us this increase. And I've got one person that just frosts me no end. He says, we're getting the short end of the stick, and we need this and we need that. Excuse me, you son of a gun. You have to stop that stealing from the taxpayer, because I put signs up said most oppressed minority in the history of the world is the American taxpayer, because we're expected to pay for everything. And you're right about the attitude of some of these government employees that I should work harder to pay their increases.
It just needs to be reasonable. We need to just be making sure that we're providing a fiscally sound and sustainable benefit situation for our employees. And I think one last thing, Andy, is that as we move into the future, we are dealing with millennials, and millennials are different. They have a different taste and culture and style than prior generations. And so that also, I think, is impactful to this conversation, because it provides us an opportunity to say, well, what is it that millennials are willing to accept? Maybe they're willing to accept a 401k over a pension. Maybe they want to have more control over how they invest their retirement. You
got two millennials right here, and the face three. Okay, you.
Nate counts.
Nate counts, but Leon, the look on his face when he hears the actual statements made by our politicians in their entirety. The problem is we live on sound bites, and they have been able to shuck and jive most people. And Trump had it right. He says, "Excuse me, the Democrats been pulling your strings since the '60s. What have they done for you? Where have you gone? You have gone into a vegetative state, and you're okay with a small pittance of what you really could achieve had you been allowed to seek, reach for the stars. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, I actually made more money than I could spend, and I found that hard to believe, but I managed to do that. But I worked very hard to spend it. But I never saved a lot, because the opportunities are endless. And that's what immigrants from Russia, and no, this is not a Russian connection, but you go to West Sacramento, you find Russian, Ukraine truck shops, okay? They're working in like we've never seen, because they're used to being shot for voicing their opinion. And they'd say, you just don't understand the freedoms that you have. We still have the same freedoms, but we can reach, we can change. I think Leon is changing a little bit. I think I'm trying to reach out more to the youth, and once you give them the truth in what's happening here, that they will actually respond positively. Leon, we've changed his mind so many times. I mean, the last segment with Governor Brown on the choo-choo, again, it's right there in front of his face. Put a railroad from Eureka to Sacramento. That's the only ocean port we have in California. Do you think maybe we could use another ocean port? Anyhow, okay.
All right, so you've talked about taxpayers and regular citizens, and as someone who qualifies as those, because I pay taxes, you can make a difference. Andy's on the Board of Supervisors. He can make a difference. How can regular citizens like me and Leon, how can we support you in this issue?
Well, wonderful question. I think we've got to, we as a citizenry have got to remain vigilant, and we can't let ourselves get apathetic to the entire process. Not only is voting every 2 years or whatever the frequency, not only is that terribly important, but even between those ballot election days, we need the citizenry to remain engaged, because what happens is with apathy, our leaders are left alone, and they're left alone to their own devices, and they don't have feedback. They don't know what the constituency is thinking, if anything, and so we all need to be pulling together, and so however you can be involved, whether it's online, whether it's going to town hall meetings, supervisor meetings, city hall meetings, that's I think a big way to make an impact.
All right. So I hope the audience is hearing that, because they've received some education on this show and then the last two shows about this issue. And I can probably promise that a good portion of the people that our audience talks to don't know about this issue. So if your audience is listening, go out and, spread the word about this. I think that's the best way to support you, right?
Yeah, and I'm really working hard to have something to have this plan in draft form by next weekend. But even if it's not next weekend, very soon, in the next, say, 2 weeks max, there will be a draft plan, 20-year plan, and it'll be thorough. It has lots of financial analysis contained into it, and we just need to get that out, and we need to discuss it and talk about it. And again, my plan is not perfect, and it's not about this particular plan. It's really more about the bigger, higher level, just talking about it. Amend the plan, do whatever, make a different plan, but talk about it, work on it in good faith for our children and our grandchildren.
Well, you will have a half hour, as long as you want it, to keep us abreast of the changes and how can we make a change, because like you said, it's not going to happen overnight. Okay, so we have to make incremental changes as we go through, and the people who are employed, we're getting the hook here. So tune in next week, and we'll continue this conversation.
Thank you.